My name is Jim Tracy. I was born in Holyoke, Massachusetts in 1919, and I was destined to work in the paper mills back there. But when I come out here at the CCC in 1937, I found out there was a new way of living. And I worked in the National Forest for a while, and then the job petered out. So I got a job on a ranch and worked there for $8 a month and my keep. And that job, when winter came, that job disappeared. So then I went back to Massachusetts because I had a ticket to go there, and there was no jobs available in the Denver area. So back there I had an opportunity to learn printing. Yeah, I was in the Baijiu Theater watching a movie, and all I could think of was, well, it won't be long now, they'll be drafting me. And I wasn't too concerned about it. It was more or less a fatalist attitude. You know, it was something you had to do, and you wanted to get it over with. It was a nice afternoon. I remember I wasn't too worried about it. I was a little worried that I wouldn't be accepted in the service because I wasn't too sure of my physical condition. But I got drafted, and the reason I got drafted and didn't volunteer, I didn't want to blame me for whatever happened. I wanted somebody else to blame. And, well, it worked out well. I got drafted in the Army, and well, it was called the Air Corps then. Somehow or other, I lucked out and ended up in the Air Force because they'd given me an IQ test and said that I was qualified to attend any of the schools that they had. And although I didn't have high school, apparently I was intelligent enough to go to school. And so that was the beginning. But 6 months of being a private kind of did me in, and I volunteered for gunnery school. Being in Las Vegas is rather a horrendous thing because we were all broke. And of course, Las Vegas is such a wealthy town, there isn't much to do unless you got some money. And we didn't have any money. I remember when I went down into town, I had 5 cents in my pocket, and I bought a bag of Bull Durham and walked around the town until it was time to come back to camp. But it was a good time. Well, from there we went to phase training, where we spend a month or so on missions. And what we would do is fly around for 4 hours and try to get lost, and then try to find our way home on the radio beam. And it worked real well. And at that time, our pilot, I guess he could foresee what was in store for him because he trained everyone on the crew how to land the airplane. He wouldn't let us actually land, but he would allow us to take it in on an approach to about 50 feet off the deck and then take it back up. And so that if anything happened to him and the co-pilot, there'd be somebody aboard the ship that knew how to take it home. Because as he pointed out, that B-17 is so stable that you could take it in about 50 feet off the runway and just cut the engines and it'll settle in. As far as I know, He was the only one that most of them kind of depended on the co-pilot if anything happened to them. And I think they'd been up the creek if they were in a situation. And we never had to do that, but it was nice to know that any one of the crew could manage it. The last time they had a B-17 out here, they told me it cost $375 to go up for a ride in it.
Yeah.
And I said, heck, they used to let me go up for nothing. It kind of makes me want to go up and look at some of the close things and find out what they're like, you know, if they're still the same. Like I noticed up in the front part of the top turret, they had put a bunch of steel plates up there, and I see this one hasn't got the steel plates. Of course, this one looks so new, I don't suppose it was ever in combat.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I didn't like the bottom turret.
Nobody did.
The bottom turret, you had the feeling that you were all by yourself in space.
Yep.
But up in top,
So vulnerable.
you had fire control, and everybody did what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fire control in combat. Everybody pretty much did what I told them to do. Of course, the pilot was the commander of the airplane, but for example, in the bomb run, the bombardier is in control of the plane, and then before they're under attack, the top turret gunner is in control of the plane. Think it'll fly?
Oh, yeah.
Hey, how about that? Look at that. We burned 15 gallons of oil for every mission. Well, that 1,200 horsepower Wright engine, and they're only 9 cylinders. They produce the power, but they run kind of rough. She's still beautiful. Each squadron had 7 planes, and a group would have 21 planes, and they would fly. The 21 planes would fly in formation, you know, 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, so they could protect one another. And the guy up in front would almost always get through, because they'd hit the planes in back of them. Look at that. Beautiful. This was early 1943. Presque Isle, Maine. We flew to Newfoundland, Iceland, and then to Scotland, and took a train down to London. And then we were assigned to Bury St. Edmunds, which is in the Midlands, and we went out as a spare crew, a replacement crew, for some of them that had been shot down. And then we were assigned our aircraft there at Bury St. Edmund, and the name of the aircraft was the Passionate Witch. And there was a naked woman flying a broom with a witch's hat on. It was kind of cute. That plane, as far as I know, went on to finish their missions. And most of my crew went on to finish their missions. I had access to all the way around 360 degrees and up and down. So I could pretty much see any fighters that were coming in, and I would report them, and we'd take it from there. It seems that after the shooting starts, your fear leaves you.
Oh, yeah.
Any fear that you may have had, it goes away, and you're so busy doing your job.
But I mean, like when you're taking off, just taking off from the.
Well, you're concerned about it, but not too much.
Yeah.
But the night before and the day after, that's when the worries get to you.
Yeah.
But at the time of the mission, most of the time you're relatively at ease. And you are concerned, of course,
Yeah.
but not unduly concerned.
I suppose a lot of difference after you've done it a few times. Yeah. Compared to,
Some, but there's always that element of fear, but it becomes a part of things. We had a mission that took us to the central part of France, to a town called Bastard, Bastard, and we dropped 2,000 pounders, and it just bounced off the ceiling. And they sent the people that finally closed it up were the British. They had 16,000-pound blockbusters,
right, yeah.
and they hit that 16 feet of reinforced concrete, and it did not pierce. That it killed everybody in there and wrecked all the machines. And on the way back from Mariensburg in East Prussia, we lost an engine over the target, and we were coming back, and we were slowing a bit down, and we were losing the formation. So I reached down and pushed it past the safety wire, and it revved up enough, and it went so fast that we sailed right past the formations. The Spitfires were the only escort I ever saw up there.
Really?
B-51? And they were underpowered, and I think they had a crucial altitude of about 28,000 feet.
Why?
But the Focke-Wulfs, they went up to 42,000 feet. So they had a hell of an advantage.
Yeah.
And then they got over there with the Thunderbirds. Now the Thunderbirds would go up, I don't know for sure, but close to 50,000 feet.
P-47s?
Yeah. And the P-47, it was a big, cumbersome, heavy plane. Nobody thought that it would amount to anything. But
They last.
it was formidable. It went against the Focke-Wulf 190 and cleaned them out one after another. I flew only 8 missions. I think I had read an article that testified that it took 8 missions to pay for our training, the expense. Now, I don't know how anybody could put that on a dollar basis, but they did. And I did 8 missions and got shot down on the 8th mission. I ended up, that day, we were coming back from Schweinfurt, and we were off course because we ended up going across Luxembourg. Now, what on earth we were doing up at Luxembourg, coming back from Schweinfurt, because Schweinfurt is in southern Germany. But anyhow, that's where we bailed out. The president said that the mission was very expensive, but it was well worth it. Well, I can name him 600 guys that didn't think so.
Yeah.
Because we lost 59 out of 84 planes that hit the target. Now, that's not so good. There was about 590 men that were roaming around Europe, various places, trying to get back. So that was quite a loss. Of course, in the long run, it was well worth it. But the ridiculous part about it was that they had briefed us for the same mission 3 days in a row. And the colonel had said, there probably will be some flak at the target. Well, everybody knew that they had time to move the flak trains in that had the heavy stuff on, and we were going to get hit by everything but a kitchen sink. And those 155s, when they go off, they could take a whole formation with them. They're so darn big and powerful. And the 88s that usually go, they'll probably wipe out 1 or 2 planes, but not the 21 in the formation. But the big guns will wipe out the whole formation. And he said that there wouldn't be any fighters. Well, we had at least 100 individual attacks on our airplane. Of course, we were Purple Heart, we were tailing Charlie down in Purple Heart Corner. That's the lowest and last plane in the target. So we were in for it. Anyway, they got us. They got us good. I remember one plane come out of the sun, and I just happened to have my sunglasses on, so I could see him. And he was coming out of the sun, but he was coming so fast I knew I couldn't track him with the computer. So I pressed the triggers and spun the turret as fast as it would go, and he ran into the bullets, and it did him in. It was after we left the target, we were on our way back, that the fighters hit us, and it was a Dornier, a converted bomber, medium bomber, that had been converted to a fighter, and it had, I'd say, 5 guns, 5 machine guns on each wing. And when they attacked us, it sounded like hail on the roof, on a tin roof. And the second Dornier that attacked us, I shot down the first one. I cut the chin turret off of it with the .50 caliber I had. And I found out later that there wasn't anybody in the chin turret, that it was remotely controlled. But the plane rolled over on its side and went down in a flat spin. But the second one that came in immediately after set fire in back of number 2 engine. And we had 1 and 2 engine out by then, but we were still flying pretty good. We had left the formation, and we were off flying by ourselves, but we were doing okay. But the fire in back of number 2 engine was sweeping back to the tail, and 3 and 4 was still running, so I pumped the fuel over to that side of the airplane. But that was a mistake, because later on when we get the firing back in number 2, I remembered that it's the empty tanks that blow your wing off instead of the full tanks. The full tanks will just burn, but the empty tanks are full of fumes, and they're strong enough to blow your wing off. We attained speeds of about 350 miles an hour, but then when we leveled off, it slowed down to about 150, and we bailed out because we were worried about that fire. If we'd have had another 5,000 feet, we'd have been able to maybe suck that fire out, because it was sweeping way back to the tail. But when we slowed down, it just sucked right back in. I had always promised myself that I would ride it down, that I wasn't going to bail out. But I'll tell you, when the fire starts licking at your tail, you change your mind. I went back to the waste compartment, and the tail gunner was climbing into the waste compartment, and the waste gunners, they had to throw one waste gunner out because he had a piece of flak in his foot and he couldn't walk, so they pushed him out, but he had a parachute with him. And then they bailed out, and I went back in, and the radio man was airsick. He had his hands down in his head down in his hands, and he was kind of out of it, you might say. So I hit him on the shoulder, and I said, "Come on, Buckley, we're going out." And I went into the bomb bay and opened the bomb bay doors and straddled the bomb bay. And before that, immediately before that, I looked down into the nose of the plane, and the navigator and bombardier were already gone. And the pilot and co-pilot were beginning to climb into the bomb bay. So I straddled the bomb bay and pulled my legs together. And to my surprise, after you leave the slipstream, there's no sensation of falling. It's the strangest thing. You're just floating in the air there, and around will come the blue and the brown, the blue and the brown. Well, when the brown came up with trees on it, I pulled the ripcord, and I swung up once and down again, and I was on the ground. I had pulled a delayed jump thinking I was still at 28,000 feet. And I didn't want them shooting at me in the parachute, so I pulled a delayed jump. And I guess I was kind of foggy because I had a bullet in the back of my head, so I guess I was not too rational, and I wasn't thinking too good. But when I hit the ground, the head started bleeding again, and I knew I had to get to a doctor as soon as possible. And I didn't care what nationality he was, because up there at 28,000 feet, it was 53 below zero, and the blood had frozen on the wound. So that probably saved my life, because I didn't bleed all that time, because I got hit about 3 hours before I went down. But it was just for a few minutes, and I got away. I suppose I was a slippery little kid.
So how'd you do it?
Well, I kicked him where I shouldn't oughta, and run like hell. And he didn't shoot at me. I suppose I was exceeding the speed of sound. I was going as fast as I could. But I must have heard him because he didn't shoot at me, or at least I didn't hear it. And that's how I got away then. It got dark soon after I went down, and I took a nap in the leaves on the side of the path, and then when I woke up it was completely dark, but there was a light off in the distance, so I made my way toward that light, and it turned out to be the back door of a farmhouse. And inside was, when I knocked on the door, I went inside, and this woman tried to push me out. And so I pushed my way in. I figured I got to get some help. I can't be nice about it. And there was a pounding on the stairs, and two men come in the room. They apparently had been up in the attic having a meeting, and they were members of the underground. And they took me across the field and into a barn, and took my army clothes and gave me civilian clothes, and they painted my shoes black, but they allowed me to keep my heavy shoes. And then they brought me over to this place that was kind of like a boarding house. And they sent for a man that I thought was a doctor, but when he tried to pull the bullet out of my head with a pair of scissors, I figured he must not be, and I made him stop. I probably darn near broke his wrist grabbing his hand, and they just bandaged it. And a gal came in and offered us some brandy, and I said, I'll take a small amount. And she gave me a drink of brandy, and I went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, there was a German patrol exercising outside of my house. So I figured they're coming to get me. But I noticed they just walked by the house. So I breathed a sigh of relief. And then 2 days later, a smuggler came over to the house, and he took my dog tags and identification. I don't know why, but he did. And so he took us into a town called Creil, Creil, and he took me to the mill of a boiler maker, a boiler manufacturer, and this man had a friend of his that was a doctor. So he took me over to the doctor's house, and the doctor took me to the hospital and x-rayed my head, then took me to his home and said that he didn't dare operate at the hospital because he didn't know who he could trust down there. So he operated on his kitchen table with his wife handing him the tools and him apologizing for not having any anesthetic. And he took the bullet out and bandaged up my head. Well, he sewed it up before that because he said he had to cut away the flesh around the wound because it would cause blood poison. And he cut it about the size of a quarter and then sewed it up. Well, he said that he had to, well, when he was sewing it up, it felt like two giant hands were crushing my head. And that's when it took 3 of them to hold me down. So then they brought me to the home of the Boilermaker, and it just would be that his wife had been an English teacher, so she spoke English real good. And I spent the next 5 weeks recuperating from the bullet wound. She was a very friendly person, and toward the end of my convalescence, we used to go out for a walk in the afternoon, and we would walk past this airfield, and a German airfield, of course, and they had ME-109s, usually just taking off to intercept B-17s that were flying above. And I visualized one of those B-17s swooping down and picking me up. Wouldn't that be nice? But it kind of give you a helpless feeling because your friends are being attacked and there isn't anything you can do. After I was shot down when I was sitting in Germany, I was listening to a German radio broadcast, and they said that the United States Air Force was crippled because of the losses on Schweinfurt. And the following day, they sent 1,000 planes to Munster, and the day after that, they sent 1,500 planes to Berlin. Can you imagine 1,500 planes? They must have had everything flying that was could get off the ground. I don't remember.
He was a squadron commander.
Uh-huh.
And he got shot down the 14th of July on
I got shot down the 14th of August.
Oh, really? In 43 or what?
Yeah, 43.
Oh, really? Well, you must have been there with him.
Yeah.
At Bury St. Edmunds?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was there with General Castle.
Colonel Castle, yeah.
Castle, yeah.
Yeah, I met the colonel on the street one day, and I saluted him, and he says, "Sergeant, we don't have time for that sort of formality over here. We got a war to fight."
Yep.
And that was his response to a salute. Mm-hmm. But then he made general before he got killed.
Right. He went over and over to France for the 50th anniversary.
Oh, I'll bet that was fun.
Yep.
Well, I was at the 50th anniversary of the 94th, but they disbanded the 8th Air Force get-togethers. Mm-hmm. So I still belong to the escapees and evadees.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. You wanna read some of the stories they send me in their magazines?
I'll bet. Yeah, I've read some of the stuff about the prison camp. He was in Stalag Luft 3.
Yeah.
And over in Sagen, Germany, and he was captured in Evro, France. But some of those stories are pretty incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, I was kind of lucky. I avoided that.
Oh, yeah?
I guess I was a slippery little kid.
Really?
I had a 30 caliber or small caliber bullet in my head, and that slowed me down. But eventually I got out. I was over there for approximately 6 months, just biding my time until I could get an opportunity to get to Spain. I was delayed because the border to Spain had been closed, and many of the guys had been captured who had tried to go across, and we could have gotten into Switzerland at just about any time, but that meant that you'd have to spend the whole war in Switzerland. There was no way out. But if you got to Spain, conceivably you could get down to Gibraltar, and that was Allied territory. I just went to a series of homes where people took care of me, and they fed me, and they would do things for me, and I worked with the underground for a while. They are so incredibly patriotic. It's hard for us to understand. Like I read a letter written to a boy's mother. He was 19 years old and going to be executed. And he wrote his mother a letter the day before, and his only apology was that he had done so little for Mother France. It was incredible. He wasn't concerned about himself being shot, but he was concerned that he had done so little. It was amazing. And I think I understood it later on when this old woman, 84, used to come over to play cards with us every afternoon. And she said that in her lifetime, she had witnessed 3 invasions by the Germans. And she lived in a border town. So they had come over and invaded France 3 times in her lifetime. And she remembers that in the First World War, the Germans were in occupation in her village, and she was hiding down in the basement with her family. And there was an awful lot of commotion outside, and then the door was broken in, and in come some Yankees. And she says, "My God, they rescued us, and I'll forever be thankful." He was a railroad worker, and he had a wife and a daughter, and they were out from Alsace-Lorraine. His wife was German, and she had learned to speak French by reading the French papers. And I stayed there for about a month. And then we got transferred to the home of a man that he had been in the Deuxième Bureau, which is a counter-espionage bureau in Indochina. And although he had been severely wounded several times and had 3 steel plates in his head, in his skull, he headed up 3 organizations of underground workers. So although he was paralyzed in one hand, he could ride a bicycle very slowly, but ride it. And he took me to his home with him riding a bike in the street and me following him on foot. I remember one incident where we went out to execute a man that was a wine merchant. And he had been accused of cooperating with the Germans. And he said he kind of begged for his life, and he promised to send over a barrel of wine and a bag of potatoes and other foods if we would let him live. And so we took him up, took his word for it. And he was so grateful, he invited us over to his house for dinner one night. And that man must have been extremely wealthy, because he had 3 kinds of meat, all kinds of alcoholic beverages, brandy, cognac, table wine, white wine. He even had some Irish whiskey. And we were there till about midnight, and we left, and as we're going home, the guys that are with me were singing, all harmonizing, Sweet Adeline, walking down the street in a French village with a 9 o'clock curfew, and they're singing Sweet Adeline. And I just crossed the street and got by myself. I got away from those crazy people. And then we made our way back to the cripple man's house and went to bed. Boy, I don't know how we got away with it. However, I found out later that it was quite common for German soldiers to walk the street half drunk, harmonizing. It was quite common. So the French people thought we were Germans, probably. It was kind of long and drawn out, but largely uneventful except for a few rough spots. We had forged identity cards, ration cards, and travel papers, because you had to have the travel papers. And occasionally we would go by train. The tickets were bought by someone else, of course. And then we had a few close calls, like in the Paris station one time. There was a great big guard with a plaque on his chest, German guard, that was checking the papers. And I wasn't too sure that I could speak good enough French to convince him. So we were looking for another way out, and the guide that we were following saw the men's room and decided to go into that. On the way, this French gendarme stopped me and asked me, qu'est-ce que c'est dans votre paquet? Of course, I didn't understand him, but I couldn't answer him even in English. I was so damn scared. So the man that was leading us come over and told the gendarme that I was deaf and dumb. So the gendarme pointed to the package and repeated his question, what's in the package? And I had a shoebox, and I stuck my thumbs in and opened it up, and fortunately there was a piece of bacon up on top. Underneath was apples, and the apples were on top this time. And I found out later, if he'd have seen the bacon, I'd have been arrested for smuggling meat into Paris. I remember on one occasion, on December 17th, there was an opportunity to go to the coast in stolen German army trucks. And there was a total of about 70 Frenchmen, Dutchmen, Polish, all kinds of nationalities that were trying to get out. And we kind of joined together. Well, something happened that day. We were all milling around, and they just picked us up, and they began questioning us. And of course, I didn't have any illusions about fooling them anymore. So I told them my name, rank, and serial number, which is all you're supposed to tell them. And he said, when they asked questions further, I just ignored them. And he says, "You'll be sorry you didn't cooperate." And then he dismissed me. He even knew my commanding officer's name. And he told me where I was from. They were very well informed. And apparently, over in this country, they had a lot of informers that, gave them a history of what we had been and where we were. It was pretty incredible. And it doesn't seem possible that they could get, or that they would even bother with such insignificant data. But apparently they considered everything. They didn't have computers available to them, but by God, they were just as knowledgeable about individuals as if they had a computer. But we made a break for it, and there was about 70 of us rushed out of this chamber that we were in, something like a hall, and when we got outside, of course, we were mingling with civilians, and we had civilian clothes on. So this Polish man, who had just recently been a prisoner with me, is calmly sitting on a park bench rolling a cigarette. So I thought it was a good idea, and I went over and we carried on a mock conversation, and when the excitement died down, we got up and walked away. Nothing very dramatic. And later on he said, if we tell them a weird story about fighting to get away, they'll believe it. But if you tell them the truth, nobody's going to believe this. So we followed this girl that I knew. She was the niece of the mayor, and we followed her, and then she took us, inadvertently, she took us to the town of Livre-Gargan, and I knew where I was then. So I made my way over to the mayor's house and let her get lost. And he let us sleep in his barn that night. And there was almost all except for 15 were captured by the Gestapo. During the night we could hear firing squads, so apparently some of the people that were captured were executed. The man whose home we had lived in had been a member of the Legion of Honor, which is equivalent to our Congressional Medal, and the Germans, if they didn't do anything else, they took care of the heroes, even from foreign countries. So he would be treated with respect and consideration, but probably would go to a prison camp. And then the next day, we went out into the country about 2 miles to the home of a teacher who took new photographs of us because we had lost our original identity cards and ration cards and such as that. And he gave us new cards with new names. And instead of taking a full face photo, he took 3/4 obliques because they looked a little different. And he drew the seal with a real fine pen by hand, and it looked just like as if it was a German seal. it just seems kind of unbelievable. Seems like as if I read a story and pretended it was me. I was darn glad I got away. But all the time I was there, I was pretty much mentally prepared to get to a prison camp because I figured eventually I'd be captured. I just had the luck of the Irish, you might say. We got a man to buy us a ticket to Toulouse, which was in southern France, and on a train. And we took a train from Paris to Toulouse. It was an overnighter. And there was, we kind of lucked out. Across this, we were in compartments. There was 6 or 8 people to a compartment, and this across from us was a German officer, a French collaborator, and a German soldier. And the French collaborator kept trying to strike up a conversation with me, and I would pretend that I was going to sleep. Because by then I could speak well enough, speak French well enough to probably convince the German soldier and the officer, but I knew I couldn't fool the French collaborator, because they had told me that I spoke French like a Russian. Well, that's worse than being an American. And so I pretty much ignored him. And all of a sudden, they stopped the train and took on some German Gestapo, and they announced that they would be checking identity cards and to have them ready. So at that point, I had to go to the toilet in the worst way. So I made my way out into the hall and made my way down to the men's room. And as I rounded the corner, there was a man standing by the door, and he turned around, opened the door, and jumped off the train. And we were doing about 50 miles an hour. Anyway, when I got back, the German Gestapo were in the compartment after me. They had finished the compartment I had been in, so I lucked out there. And when we got to Toulouse, we were met by a French priest who took us to an apartment building, and as he was looking out the window, he noticed some neighbors were commenting on us being in the allegedly empty building. So he was afraid they'd blow the whistle, so he took us to the home of a black marketeer that also owned a restaurant. He used to come over and take us over to his restaurant every noon and feed us a very good meal that included meat. And I don't know what kind of meat it was, but it was meat. And he had an apartment building, and it was empty. And he set us up in there. And on the first floor, they had a pile of potatoes. On the second floor, a pile of turnips. On the third floor, a pile of carrots. It took us 3 days and 2 nights to go about 40 miles across the Pyrenees into Spain. And an interesting item, just before we entered Spain, I couldn't go on anymore. I just flopped down in the mud. It had been raining, and I was exhausted. And this Dutchman that was with us had called 2 young French boys to help me out. And the vice president of the International Aeronautical Association was with us, and he gave me a little pill. I don't know what it is, but it was a pep pill of some kind. And another Dutchman that was with us that had been the chief of police of The Hague and got in trouble with the Germans, gave me a drink of wine. And that pill picked me up, and I was still going strong 7 hours later. We crossed into Spain, and the first town that we come to, some of the guys that were with us surrendered to the police in the first town. But I'll tell you, it's quite a thing, not having seen a lit town for some 3 years, and to be up there in the mountains looking down into the valley and see a town all lit up is really something. And I was afraid to give myself up in the first town because I'd heard that the Spanish guards had sold the people back to the Germans. So I wanted to get further into Spain. So we walked approximately 7 more miles, and then we came into a town just at dawn. So we went to a home and banged on the door and asked the woman to fix us breakfast. Well, she was fixing us breakfast, and we had given her 50 pesetas, which is $5 American, which is about a month's pay over there. And so the man of the house got up out of bed and called his young son to go out and ostensibly get some firewood. But the kid come back with the carabinieri in tow. Well, the carabinieri was in his undershirt, and he was introduced all around, very friendly fellow, and then he left. But he was back in a few minutes, this time with his uniform on and his rifle, and he immediately very formally put us under arrest and took us to the local jail. And it was a modern jail, all right, but it didn't have any glass in the windows. Had the bars, but no glass. And this was in February. So it was, although the temperatures are mild in Spain, it was kind of cool. And then there was a boy going by the jail, and we called him over and asked him if he could get us some wine. And he come back with 3 bottles of wine. So we gave him some money, and he took off. A little while later, this woman come along with him in tow. She's holding him by the ear. she thought that he had stolen money. So we explained to her that we had paid him for getting the wine. So we asked her if she thought she could get in touch with the military attaché in Barcelona. So then she said no, and she went away, but she sent a young boy over, about 16, and we asked him if he could get in touch with the military attaché. Well, we didn't know if we could or not, and he went away, and we didn't see him anymore. But the following day, this young man in his 20s came to the jail in a beautiful suit and a briefcase. He turned out to be a lawyer, and he bailed us out of jail and set us up in the best hotel in town and gave us $13 in spending money and a carton of Lucky Strike cigarettes. I'll tell you, boy, that was really something, especially the cigarettes. And each week, for the time we were there, about a month, he'd show up and give us another $13. The military attaché came over, and he told us that the diplomatic relations were about ready to be broken off between the United States, and he would try to warn us. And if we got the warning, we were to hit the kitchen and get all the food we could and head into the mountains and go toward Portugal, which was approximately 40 or 50 miles from Lerida, which was the town we were in. Later on, we were met by an American salesman. He was selling washing machines to the army over there, and he took us all out and bought us a pair of boots. And it was a fine pair of boots. The boots that I came over the mountain with fell apart 3 days after I got into Spain. I guess all the water, because I didn't take them off all the time we were crossing the Pyrenees, and the water and everything just ruined them, and they kind of fell apart. Anyway, we needed boots, and he bought us new boots, and then one day the military attaché came over and told us we were going to Gibraltar by way of Madrid. And he says, no matter what the aggravation, don't respond to it, even if they slap your face, he says, because the Spanish don't like us. So if they realize who you are, they might insult you. And fortunately, there wasn't any incidents. We stopped in Madrid and had lunch, and that was kind of interesting because I didn't know what to order, so I pointed to the dish that the man next to me was eating and told him I wanted that. And he brought it, and it looked like small pieces of spaghetti about 6 inches long. But when I ate it, it went crunch, crunch. So on closer inspection, each little piece of spaghetti had eyes in it. It was baby eels that had been cooked up and these people are eating it, you know. So I didn't eat very good that day. And then that afternoon, we went down to Gibraltar. A collection of small bottles of alcoholic beverages. I had about 40 small sample bottles. The English confiscated. The English confiscated it. Here I had carried it all through Spain and everything. Nobody bothered me. When I got to Allied territory, they took it away from me. Well, I don't know if it was against the law or if they wanted it for themselves. But anyway, I figured it was a small price to pay for being liberated. I was at a bar one night, and I heard a Scotsman speak French at the bar. And if you've ever heard a Scotsman speak French, it's terrible, you know. And I went up and introduced myself, and he said that he was going to Prestwick, Scotland the following morning. And I said, can I go along? He said, be there at 8 o'clock and you can. So I said, what are you flying? He said, a C-47. I said, where do you refuel? He says, we fly it nonstop. And I said, a C-47 won't fly from Gibraltar to Scotland. He says, well, we'll be in a bit of a fix, won't we? And they have a fine sense of humor. And it seems they had outfitted the wings, the outer wings, with small tanks at every little opening that could be opened up and drained down into the main tanks when they were low on fuel. So it just about doubled their range. So I went out the next morning, and next thing we know, I'm in Prestwick, Scotland. I took a train down to home base in Bury St. Edmunds and went out to the air base there. And there wasn't anybody in the office when I went in to see the commanding officer. So I walked into his office, and he looked up and he says, you're Tracy, aren't you? I said, yeah. He says, well, man, you're dead. And I says, how do you mean? He says, we got a report that you had the back of your head blown off. My regular crew had gone on to finish their missions. I had been flying with a crew that was on their first mission. And we had volunteered because I wanted to get my missions in by Christmas. But it didn't work out that way. Christmas I spent sitting around over in France. The co-pilot that we had in phase training was still on the base. He had been promoted, and he was operations officer over there. And they called him over, and he had me talk to a bunch of crewmen and officers about what's the best way to avoid capture, you know, stuff like that. And I talked with them all of one afternoon, and then I made my way down to London, where they interned me. They insisted that I had to be identified by someone who knew me before I got shot down. The man who identified me was the man whose place I took when I got shot down. And he'd been reduced to private because he had failed to come back on furlough, you know. And so when I took his place, and when he identified me, I don't know how he could identify me because I didn't know the man, but he did. He identified me, and they released me. The flying boot, you wear it on the left-hand side below the pocket on your uniform. And I remember a brigadier general said to me when I was on the plane going to Newfoundland, is that an official medal, Sergeant? And I said, semi-official, sir. He says, well, what the hell is it? I says, it's a flying boot. It signifies I flew over and walked back. He says, oh. And that was the end of that. My nephew had graduated from Air Force Academy, and he come out to the house with some colonel's daughter in tow, and he said, Uncle Jim, didn't you say you flew 17s? And I said, yeah. He says, we got one out at the field, and they took us up, and boy, you guys were real daredevils. He doesn't realize that was a state of the art. That was the best available. Isn't she beautiful? I can remember some of the veterans saying, well, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of times you'll find out that nothing happened. That's why they didn't want to talk about it. But to me, it seems so incredible that these veritably impossible things happen to just an ordinary person. When I got to Mitchell Field, New York City, they gave me a 21-day pass, and I took a train up to Holyoke. And when I got to Holyoke, I was kind of afraid to go home because I hadn't told anybody I was coming. And I didn't know it at the time. I'd been pronounced dead after 6 months. And they sent my mother a letter saying that she could collect my insurance. But she never applied for it because my father said she didn't believe that I was dead. So I went to a bar room, and I'm having a drink, and this man next to me said, aren't you one of the Tracy boys? Because my mother had 5 sons in the service. And I said, yeah. He says, well, I'm going to take you home before you get drunk. And it come to find out he was the next door neighbor. So he took me home, and I went up the hall and banged on the door. And my mother come to the door and said, who is it? I said, me. And she says, who's me? I says, Jim. She says, oh, my God. And then she must have passed out because when the door opened, my father is holding her. And so I went in, and all the kids got up, and we're sitting around the table, and they're asking me questions, and my sister said, did you get hit? And I said, yeah. She says, where? I said, in the back of the head. She says, I thought so. And my mother asked questions, and I answered them, and my father never said a word. He just sat there with a grin on his face. And he must have been pretty pleased. For the next 21 days, wherever I went in that town was paid for. If I went into a barroom, the drinks were paid for, or everything I did was paid for.
History.
Yeah, my friend says you're living history.
Yep.
I don't feel like living history.
Tell my dad I saw you. He'll probably know you.
He might.
Yeah.
I was pretty infamous.
Jim Tracy.